Welcome to the Thinking Theologically podcast, where we teach you how and why you should think theologically. I am your host, Spencer Shaw, bringing you a very special episode. This is the first of what we hope to be many interviews that we will do with people who have certain experiences or expertise in areas that relate to theology. And so this is our first try at an interview. It's also the first time we will be doing a video recorded version of one of our podcasts. So make sure to look for the video on YouTube, the podcast audio on any of the podcasting platforms that you might be on, as well as check out our website, thinkingtheologically.org. And you can find us on any social media that you're on: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. We are probably there in some form or fashion. With that out of the way, now this first interview is going to be with a good friend of mine who we go all the way back to our time at Oklahoma Christian with one another. That is Jake Doberenz. Jake, how are you doing?
Hello, glad to be on this first interview and test it out and experiment and all that with you.
It's appropriate that you said test and experiment because those of you listening or watching don't get to see all of the behind the scenes for like an hour that went on trying to figure out all the glitches of this first interview, the first video recording. It was a bit of a adventure, I would say, but I think we have it all figured out now. If you're listening to this, let me rephrase that. If you're watching this, we figured it out. If there's no video to this, then we didn't, and we eventually gave up. Anyway, but Jake, it's very good to have you on the episode. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, especially since it took us a little bit of time to get all of the technical problems worked out, though we're talking about technology, so I think it's appropriately ironic. With that being said, the reason I wanted to have Jake on is he is getting ready on March the 1st to release a book called AI in Church Ministry: Applications of Artificial Intelligence for Faith Communities. And so I wanted to have Jake on to talk about his book and for us to have a little bit of theological and ethical discussion about artificial intelligence, which is on the rise, something that I know a lot of people are interested in talking about, some people worried and concerned about. And then we'll end with a little bit of application for those of you who may be ministers or have some kind of leadership or volunteer role in the church, how artificial intelligence may be beneficial to you. But Jake, I want to start with having you just describe and kind of summarize your book for us.
Yeah, so AI in church and ministry was born out of this idea that I thought ministers and churches need to know about these kind of ideas. I wanted to explore it theologically, but more than that, I just wanted to present, here's what you can do with this. And so a lot of the book, the majority of the book, is just like the subtitle says, applications. Here's what you can do. Here's kind of the different ways you can continue ministering, can engage with your church community, can help the broader world just using AI technology. So I kind of have it sliced up in different parts. I talk about the theology and the ethics, the front end, and then the rest of it's just applications. Here's different ways you can use in your teaching ministry, administrative care and community, all that jazz.
So, who would you say the primary audience of the book is?
So, the idea for the book is definitely for ministers, obviously. I think other people can appreciate some of the theological stuff I do at the beginning. Maybe one day there's a book that just kind of expands on those ideas about theology of technology and a theology of artificial intelligence. But primarily it's for ministers. And a lot of it is going to be probably the most useful to ministers of smaller churches, churches that don't have the staff capabilities as some big mega churches. There's going to be some stuff in there that will be for the larger churches that do that kind of programming or have the technology. Like, I mean, I don't know about your church, Spencer. You probably don't have like facial recognition technology or anything
No,
in your church.
I think that
And
would scare some of our members away, but
I don't know that you should have that, but just, I have read and seen some applications for people that use facial recognition to count attendance in their churches. So there's a
yeah.
few things like that. And again, like ethically, we can quibble on that. But I'm just saying it has been done.
Yeah.
It has been done. But a lot of it, honestly, is for small church ministers who are wearing 14, 15 different hats and doing all these different things so they can save some time and energy and effort with artificial intelligence.
I mean, I'll say I've had the opportunity to read the book now before it's actually been released. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it is what you just said. I know we're going to talk about this here a little bit later on, but I'm a minister in a small church context. It's me and right now a part-time secretary. And so there's a lot that I have to do, a lot of responsibilities that are put on me. Because again, in a smaller church, we have people that volunteer and do things, but sometimes you're limited on the number of volunteers that you can have because you don't have a ton of people. And sometimes, especially different times of the year, there's a lot of things that need to be done. And I found that the most helpful thing in the book of helping me to think in ways, how can AI help me be more efficient and get more done? And also when you think in terms of personal health, how can it save me time that I can then spend on myself and on my relationships and the things that you have to do outside of the walls of the church and outside of the work that you have to do. And so you're not up until midnight every night designing logos or something like that when AI can help you do it much faster. So I did very much appreciate that aspect of the book. So if you had to give one takeaway that you think ministers, church leaders who are reading this book, the one thing that you want them to take away from your presentation of AI in ministry, what would you say that is?
I think the big takeaway is, look, ministers, artificial intelligence can help you do the fun and rewarding part of ministry. I recently stumbled across a Barna Group poll that was polling ministers about like their favorite aspects of ministry. Teaching and preaching is one of the highest percentages. That's why a lot of us get education and we get into ministry because we want to share this stuff, this information. We want to change lives. And the parts that people are not excited about, the administration, the planning events, all those little stuff, most people don't get into it because, ooh, I just want to, do administrative work and paperwork and things like that.
Oh yeah, paperwork.
Woo!
That's why you become a minister.
Yeah, or have to deal with all the technology or, troubleshoot this. And what artificial intelligence does, the biggest takeaway, is it helps you do the stuff that you are gifted at, the reason you went into ministry, help you stay in ministry and enable that relational aspect that ministry has, in some contexts, kind of gotten away from. I want ministers to be able to do what they love and what God has called them to do. It's that simple.
I know in my experience, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but something else that I found with that is preaching is where I feel very, very gifted, and that's where I'm passionate. I am someone that I like, I don't like paperwork, but I like a lot of administrative tasks, and I like some of the design stuff. Like I enjoy that. But one thing that I found is when you're not constantly in like the design world for it, example, it's sometimes hard to just pick that up and do it a couple times a year and it not take you a long period of time, because when you're even just using the tools like on Photoshop, and at one point in time I had a certification in using Photoshop, but I use it a couple times a year. And I have to remind myself, okay, I know how to do this, but I don't remember how to do it. Like, I don't like, where do I go? What tools do I use? Some things like that. And so it can take me some time. Like, I almost have to relearn when you do it 2 or 3 times a year, and you're not a professional graphic designer. And that's something that struck me about your book, and just thinking about how AI can help with some of those things. So where you go from, oh, I don't have to make it from scratch now, I can just do some small edits on it. That's real easy to do. You don't have to have much expertise in design either to do small edits and things like that. And so just helping ministers do the things that they feel both more gifted at and maybe more called to do. I did appreciate that aspect of your book. So, as we've talked about, it's all about artificial intelligence. Why do you think AI is such an important topic?
Well, it's not going away. That's the first thing. Like, it's here, and it's gonna stay. We all have heard things about, like, there's that one quote from some Greek philosopher about, I can't believe all the kids are reading these days. It's corrupting their minds. They have to read. Well, that stuck around. And when TV came, it stuck. Every new technology, the way the world works is, it's not going away. And what I don't think we should do is just give up and say, bring it on, without thinking critically.
Yeah.
So I think instead, as Christians, where we are supposed to use our minds, sometimes we forget that as Christians, but God gave us these brains to think, and there are whole books of the Bible dedicated to wisdom. We have to apply that to something like technology. It's not going away. People in your congregation will get their jobs changed, maybe even taken away by artificial intelligence. The social media platforms that people in the pews are on use kinds of artificial intelligence. You've scrolled your favorite streaming service, there's a kind of artificial intelligence there. It's everywhere, and it's not going away. And we have to talk about it and figure out what to do with it. And here's the nice thing. It can help us out. Help us do what we're called to do. And that's something to rejoice about. Using wisdom, but still something to rejoice about.
Right, because we live in a world that's constantly changing, right? There's constantly new things coming out, and this wouldn't be the first time that people or the church have some concerns or some reservations about new things, particularly new technologies. Right? I think you and I can relate to growing up in this technological revolution, right? Because I know in my lifetime, Google was invented. Like, I remember learning, oh, hey, now you can go and Google this. Like, that's when Google became, I think it was invented maybe a little bit before I was born, but it wasn't really useful. And that was something, and, everyone thinks about, oh, YouTube. Like, streaming was something that came to be and was invented in our lifetime. Like, the idea of streaming even audio on the internet was not a thing for a very long period of time. And so where we've come just shows the way that we've advanced. And I think it's important for churches to be able to adapt to that ever-changing world. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that importance of the church being able to adapt to the way that things change in our world. And I like what you said about wisdom. It's not always just, oh, this is new and shiny, let me take it. And exactly. But I can't act like it doesn't exist, right?
Oh yeah, and this is how the church gets in trouble, and how we end up we can end up pushing people away. It's, well, my church just tried to pretend this didn't exist or never engaged in it.
Yeah.
That could be topics like science or sexuality. We never talk about it. People get their information from some source. And if the church doesn't talk about it, they're going to get their source from something outside the church. And a lot of times that's not going to be the kind of information or wisdom we want them to receive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand not every minister is equipped for talking about all of this. It's one reason I have a book out, and there are plenty of other resources that I can point to at the end of the show where we can learn more and we can get involved in this. But we can't ignore it. Somebody's going to disciple the congregation, and hopefully it's the called ministers of God that are doing that digital discipleship and not the tech bro in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to disciple people very well, given what he wants, and that's your money and your privacy and all that kind of stuff.
Digital discipleship. I like that. I like that idea because we live in a digital world, and I know, like, I'm not a social media guy. I don't enjoy using social media, and I know that's weird for a lot of people that are my age, but it's not my thing. But I have to get out of my comfort zone and use it because that's the medium that people get their information from, first off. And so part of it is like, well, ministers and the church need to learn how to use it. Otherwise, people are going here to get their information, and there's nothing from a credible theological source, right?
Absolutely.
And that's true for the members of all of our congregations. And so whether you want to or not, sometimes you're a reluctant digital disciple. Paul was kind of a reluctant apostle, I guess. He was very much in another direction, and God's like, no, this is what you're going to be doing. And that could be said true for like all of the disciples, right? They kind of had their mindsets, well, this is what I'm going to do. And Jesus has a way of changing them. So I think that's important. We've been talking a lot now about artificial intelligence. So let's define it now. How would you define AI?
Yeah, it's probably good. AI is mock human intelligence. Really, at its core, it is pattern recognition. It is a very advanced version of the kid in your class with photographic memory compiling something based off of patterns and things. Some scholars kind of call it like a parrot, where a parrot can, Polly wants a cracker, can repeat things, but the parrot itself is not necessarily intelligent in understanding that. And I do like to highlight this about AI. And I even mentioned in the book that I'm using the word artificial intelligence, but there's a good case to be made that it's not so intelligent. Will we get better in the future? Probably, and it might scare us in the future. I don't know. It scares people now, but right now it is not the same thing as human creativity. Although we as humans do, we take inputs and we synthesize in things. We have an understanding of what we're piecing together. Our AI does not have that same understanding, at least not where we're at now. Mm-hmm. I point that out also to say, like, we're not quite there where there's the AI overlords are going to take us out or whatever.
Real life AI, Terminator.
Yeah, in many ways, artificial intelligence is still kind of dumb. I mean, we've probably all had, if you played around with AI, video, photo, text, it does weird stuff sometimes. And you're like, why does that image have 7 fingers? We know,
Yeah.
We know humans don't do that, but for whatever reason, the programs spit stuff out. So, there you go. That's my long, labored but also at the same time short and non-technical definition.
So you provide pretty much that definition in your book, and I know that was something that I appreciated about it because it highlighted the reality that, if there's something to like be fearful of, I think it's something that could happen in the future, but we're not there yet. Like you said, it's synthesizing information that's already there, that human beings have put together. AI really isn't doing unique research and contributions to a field or something like that. It's taking what's already there and becoming kind of like, I know you mentioned this in your book, a research assistant. I think you used that phrase several times about how it can function as that assistant that can go and do all of this research that would take us hours or days to do, that AI can do in seconds and bring together what's important for whatever task we have at hand. And I think what you said is so important for people to understand, especially if you're like, I don't know what this is, and you're not really a tech person, and all of this is being talked about, to understand the way that it functions is not something for us to be worried about, at least now. Like you said, it's not really that intelligent. It's just speedy at bringing information together. It's almost like a Google on steroids, I guess. And
in many ways it is, and even search engines are employing it to give you search results based on AI, which there's certain issues with that and things like that for citations and sort of. But what I want to stress is AI can do your taxes, but it can't cure cancer. The thing is, like with taxes or something like that, and maybe the accountants are all going to come after me in the comments or whatever, but there are rules and things to accounting, and it can apply those rules to a set of data. But curing cancer right now is not a solved issue. It's not a known quantity. So AI can maybe talk about some different, can tell us some different ways different proteins can interact with each other, but it's not great at generating such a complex problem like that. Not to say that it can't be creative. If you tell it to write a novel, it will write a novel. But it's going to do that based on other stuff. If you tell it cure cancer, it's going to be like, I don't know how to do that. I have not reached the point where, AI has not reached the point where it's going to solve those problems. We still need humans. So, hey, we're still relevant. Woo.
This is has nothing to do with what we're talking about with AI and the church, but I just want to give a little side note on the tangent that I like to harp on. I think that illustrates for our schools and universities the problem with educating our kids on information recall when AI can do it a lot quicker and a lot better. But what human beings bring to the table is the ability to think and synthesize that information and discover new things, and kind of like you said, the things that aren't already set up in the rules. So we still have a role. I wonder if sometimes our education system has forgotten the role that human beings are to be playing in the world. I guess that kind of fits. We're going to talk about human beings here in a minute.
Yeah.
So with that being said, let's get into some of the ethical and theological considerations for AI. You mentioned that as the church and as Christians, we need to be engaging with these new innovations that come about, but with wisdom was the word that you used. You can't just new, shiny, let's grab it. So what would you say is the biggest danger with AI as it currently stands?
Well, the danger with any technology. So there's a professor, communication guy named Marshall McLuhan. I don't talk about this in the book, but I'm going to throw this one for free. Marshall McLuhan talks about how technology changes us, and technology always extends a part of ourself, but it ends up atrophying whatever it extends. So he talks about the one example like the plow. Now we can bury seeds in the ground way quicker, or something like that. But it changes some of our old habits of how we plant. And when we bring in, now we have a columbine going through our fields instead of a guy with a hoe or something. Well, that changes how we approach farming. So it's always the case. And I think the biggest danger of AI is not the Terminator. It's okay. What do we now lose? And I fear, unfortunately, it ties in with our talking about education. I fear that critical thinking is one of those things that we might lose when it. And we've already, in the age of Googling all the answers, I already fear sometimes we rely too much on what technology can give us, where we ignore some of the homespun human wisdom and that kind of thing. So it's tough to pick the biggest danger of AI, but I'm always aware of, okay, what are we losing now? And I fear that we might be losing our critical thinking, because if the machine can do it for us, we are now going to lose a part of that. So I hope in the future that education, it's the liberal arts tradition. It's let's train people who think and who can synthesize, so we don't lose that part of our humanity.
I think you're right, because sometimes I wonder if we haven't already lost our critical thinking ability. I listen to people sometimes, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, sports or politics or church, and sometimes we function like AI, just saying what we've heard in other places, and without being critical of that. And this podcast is called Thinking Theologically, and thinking is intentional. Like, it's a way of thinking about God and about Scripture and about the Bible, not just going through the motions. And I know, for whatever it is, we as Christians are some of the worst at doing that, of just, well, this is what I've always heard, and this is the way that it is, and nothing can be different, instead of actually taking time to think about what it is that we believe, even if we don't change our minds, but just thinking about just thinking about other things that people present. It amazes me how often I might present a new idea and get pushback just because it's new. And it just sometimes we can be unwilling to think about things. And I think there's this balance between, we can hold on to our faith and our core beliefs, like what makes us Christians. I think that all hinges around Jesus, his life, death, resurrection, ascension. Like, we can hold on to that. We can hold on to some of those core practices, baptism, Lord's Supper. I think those are very theologically significant. We don't have to lose those by thinking critically about, the whatever it may be, the creation account in Genesis 1, or something like that sometimes we can get bent out of shape about. But it is important to be critical thinkers, to teach critical thinking, as you mentioned, and that kind of flows into the next thing that I wanted to think about, is the risks for children, the risks for our youth, our teens, and how that plays into youth ministry. So I'm preaching minister at my church, but I'm also currently, I guess, like interim youth minister. So I'm working with our kids as well, and just thinking about what are some of the risks for our kids and our young people, and how does that connect with ministry in the church? Like, what do youth ministers need to be doing and talking about to kind of combat some of those risks, and help even to balance out with the critical thinking as well, and how we can facilitate that in our churches?
Oh, it does tie into critical thinking again because I think I think one of the dangers for youth in particular, not that adults always can deal with this too, but it's the kind of sources of information. I'm worried about things like deepfakes and videos that look real but are artificially intelligent in some way, shape, or form. Um, I'm worried that, especially in the more unformed, gullible mind of young people, that to again bring that concept of discipleship, that they will be discipled in a very different, wrong direction. Um, I'm also worried with youth about privacy and things like that, especially young people being more vulnerable when it comes to their data and things like that. Generally, more likely to show off things online and to just not maybe make all the right choices when
Yeah.
it comes to what kind of information they should put out there. So I'm worried about stuff like that. It comes kind of back to wisdom. Um, I wonder sometimes if the church now the church is a Bible teaching, theology teaching institution, but as branches off of those things, I do think we are called to help people think about, um, wisdom and critical thinking and all of that, because that all comes back to,
Hmm.
ultimately what we do in church is try to make better human beings.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we say that, we teach these things because you're going to be a better person. It's not about we need to save you from hell, or it's not just about things like that. Ultimately, we're saying this is a better way to live. And so I think, especially people like youth ministers, we have an obligation to start training these people in how do we live with wisdom? Um, what does Jesus say about the way we show up and present ourselves? Um, for a while now, things like being anonymous online have kind of been a double-edged sword, where we can show up online a different way than in real life, and there are those kind of issues that I think we need to talk about, and that worry me. Where who is your authentic self? Is it the person who tweets, or whatever they call it on X nowadays, or is it the flesh and blood
Yeah.
human being who walks around? Um, I know I've been a middle school teacher and I've worked with high school students. I've done the youth ministry thing myself, and it's certainly fascinating to see somebody who can chat online all day, share all the memes, do all the stuff, but you cannot have a face-to-face conversation with them. So that's just technology things in general. Honestly, I
Hmm.
realized halfway through I started talking about issues that are not at all related to artificial intelligence,
Well, I
but
mean,
it's all kind of mixed up, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's all important,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, this is going to segue into the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, but the one of the things that you heavily emphasize in the book is the human connection, and I think for especially when I think about teenagers, so like what we think of youth ministry age, middle school, high school, I think that developing relationships with them, that they have people to talk to about these things.
Mm-hmm.
I did a sermon 2 weeks ago about intergenerational relationships, mentorships, having people to imitate, and why I think that's so important. And I think that's important for everyone, regardless of your age. One of the things I mentioned is it gives you someone to pursue after, so we don't get complacent in our faith. We realize there's still work to do. I could be better. I could be wiser. I can look more like Jesus. I've got room to grow, and that's not, I'm not for us demeaning ourselves. I'm worthless. You're not worthless. Jesus died for you. You're definitely not worthless, but that doesn't mean we've achieved perfection. Paul says, we were in Philippians. Paul says that, I don't think I have achieved perfection, but this one thing I do, I forget what lies behind. I chase forward towards what lies ahead. But I think that's even more important for teens, young adults, right? To have people that they can look at and they can go to and they can have these kind of conversations with and to glean that wisdom. You keep mentioning wisdom, and I think that wisdom is so important of how do we've got these things at our fingertips, how do we utilize them? One more thing that I would just say that came to my mind when you were talking about the technology and especially the critical thinking, and that the church has a responsibility to that. I think it's important for youth ministers to have discussion in the classes that you teach that forces the kids to think critically about what you're reading. You're reading Genesis, you're reading Galatians, you're reading Matthew. Find ways to think critically, and we'll talk about this in ministry usage, but AI can help you do that. Like the AI can help those questions that can help your kids think critically about whatever it is that you're reading, and it works very well. I could actually tell you that for personal experience, but I'll save that for the application portion. But the human relationship, I mentioned one of the things you emphasize heavily in your book is the importance of human connection, that we don't want to take the human out of the church and replace it with technology or replace it with artificial intelligence. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And I think where it begins is I would like you to just define human. What does it mean for us to be human? And I know that's not an easy question. I think on this podcast, we've gone through the different areas of theology, and anthropology is one of them. Like there's a whole section of theology devoted to what it means to be human. So I'm asking you a question people have written entire books on. But if there's a way for you to kind of simply, at least what will relate to AI, what it means for us to be human beings created in the image of God.
Well, so here's the truth of the matter. As humanity learns more about the world we live in, we keep changing the goalposts for what it means to be human. Because I remember, like growing up, we talk about, humans are unique because they can speak languages. And then it's like there's this science coming out. It's like, I think whales can like communicate and then this stuff. Like, okay, wait. So humans are the only ones that can make technology. They're like, you've seen what an ant does, or this crow used technology in this unique way to solve this problem. And so it's like but I think all of those keep missing the point. And something about artificial intelligence that I actually saw recently on Twitter. What do you know? There is good there. Somebody pointed out that when we talk about artificial intelligence, like ruining the creative careers and things like that, we're sort of saying like that creativity is what it means to be human. And I would still argue that artificial intelligence has not reached the point of true creativity. But everything keeps missing the goal point. Ultimately, what makes a human being, I think, is that imago Deo. It's that image of God is in us, and that's what makes us unique and special. And the fact that, the whale can sing the song, but the whale can't, build the Eiffel Tower or something. We're also sort of a combination of all these things. Our greatest strength, in many ways, is that we are generalists. We're not the strongest, animal in the world, but we're maybe not even always the smartest. Maybe, some people, but we kind of bring all this stuff that God has endowed us with, I think. I think I'm going to kind of leave it there because I'm not the expert, but Joshua K. Smith has a book called Robot Theology that I quoted several times in the book because he challenges me a lot. His book essentially asks asked the question, should we give robots rights and personhood? And he has kind of an interesting way to go about that. He sort of argues, yes, sort of ish. Um, and he differentiates what it means to be human and what it means to be a person. You gotta read the book.
Okay.
Because I'm not the expert on that kind of stuff. But I've ran away from your question. The thing is, like, that's kind of the best I can do because, yeah, theological anthropology, such a complex thing.
Yeah. But like I appreciate what you said, especially about how we, how we relate to other animals, but we're kind of almost in a lot of ways the best of a lot of different things that we can point to in nature, and it comes back to the image of God. We're created to reflect God,
Right.
and that's something that we're uniquely called to do, and that the church is especially uniquely called to do. The church, I believe, is the location where the Spirit is transforming us to better reflect God.
100%.
I've always used the imagery of a mirror, that human beings are God's mirror, and sin cracks our mirror, but the Spirit restores the mirror. So we always reflect God to some portion, but like a broken mirror, it's imperfect. The Spirit's the solution to that. So the church, I think, has this unique calling to reflect God. And that's where I really appreciated your book and trying to strike this balance of, hey, AI can be helpful, and we'll talk about a lot of the benefits of it, but this humanness, like we there's still something that AI can't do, and it will never be able to reflect God. And even if it can perfectly mimic human beings, God hasn't given the mandate to AI to reflect him. He still says the human beings are the ones that I created and designed to reflect me. So we always have that calling, and the church especially needing to balance those two things. So there's two things that I wrote down here. Balancing AI and gifted members who are gifted by the Spirit to do things that maybe we would be tempted to let AI do. So, I mentioned like design earlier. There are Christians who I believe, are gifted by the Spirit in creativity, in design, I know you and I both had Dr. Charles Ricks at OC, who he's now in New York. He's teaching and also writing plays. Like he's a professor of Old Testament, and he writes plays in New York. And it's like that's the guy who has been gifted by the Spirit in creativity. But as AI rises, we might be tempted to say, well, let artificial intelligence do it. And so in churches in particular, how do we strike that balance?
I mean, it's a great question. It's something that's very, I guess, close to my heart, for more of a cliche term. I'm also a creative. I have a couple of fiction books. I got some novels out. I got some short plays myself. Not on Broadway or anything.
So go check out his fiction books. If you're go buy this book, and then go buy those books, and then come back and listen to us. So,
brilliant. Yeah, pause right here.
And go purchase them.
And I also, through a variety of the things I do, I work with Christian authors and creatives, all sorts of ways. I used to run the podcast Creatively Christian, that interviewed different Christian artists. So I'm in this world. I'm in the mess of things. And I find that this scares people. Like, this terrifies gifted creative individuals who are so scared that they won't get to exercise their gift. And I sympathize with that. I really do. I am not a doomsday kind of guy. I don't think this is the end of the world or creativity, but I get it. But one of the interesting things that jumped out to me, one, is the way that AI can make up for where we aren't gifted. Um, I saw a Christian author complain that a certain person was selling a book marketing course that advocated for using AI to write marketing copy. And I, as a creative who likes the creative stuff but doesn't like to write marketing copy, was thinking, I would love AI to do that job for me. That's
Yeah.
what it's for. So I could write my novel and and have that outlet, but have the artificial intelligence do what I don't want to do.
Right.
So kind of bringing it back to this giftedness thing, when it comes to the body of believers, um, not every church is created equal. I think that we don't know who's going to be in the pews and their different skills. And gift-based ministry is something that's hugely central to my theology, my ecclesiology. I absolutely believe in putting people where they belong giftedly, and the reverse of, well, maybe that guy shouldn't give the communion talk. But
Amen.
I get off track there. So I absolutely think if there is somebody in the congregation that can do it, invite them to be involved in that. I mentioned earlier how ministers often don't like the administrative thing, the event planning. There
Yeah.
are people in the world who love that. Well, let them exercise their gift to the
Mm-hmm.
glory of God. But
Exactly.
we're talking small churches. It's just the reality. There might not be a logo designer in there. There might not be somebody who can do X, Y, Z, and we figure it out. I preach at a small rural church about twice a month, and there was definitely a Sunday where the typical song leader wasn't there, and I was also leading singing, which is nowhere close to my spiritual or physical gifting at all.
Nobody
And
wants me doing that either, so
I know.
I'm with you.
So I did it because that's what needed to be done. But so that's what we do in the church. Now I don't know how AI could have filled that role of song leading, but the point is, like, there are these gaps that AI can help us fill. But hopefully a minister knows the gifting of their congregation enough to know when the gifting is present there
Yeah.
and maybe when it's not. I mean, that's my hope. For so many things,
So yeah, so hint ministers, pastors, elders, you have a responsibility, I think, to make sure people's gifts are being utilized. I preached on this and talking about using gifts. This was a couple weeks ago in this series I've been doing on culture. And one of the things that I said was that it's two-sided. Members have a responsibility for determining and finding ways and making suggestions about how to use their gifts, but ministers and elders and pastors and church leaders have a responsibility to notice where people are gifted and find ways to utilize their gifts as well, and to take the suggestions that people make, like, hey, I would like to see us do whatever. Well, let them go and do it. There's a sermon there, but I won't preach it right now. The other thing that I wrote down is balancing AI and the human touch. So particularly thinking about ministers, which you mentioned is kind of the primary audience here. Church leaders as
Right.
well would probably fall under that bucket. But Christian ministry is a very human experience, from visiting people who are sick or bereaved to the preaching side of things. Of you have to know your audience, like you have to know what's going on. And I think I've probably said this on the podcast before, because my sermons are planned like 6 months, a year, sometimes a year and a half in advance. And the Spirit works wonders of being like, hey, when you get here, you're gonna want to preach on this, and it's like there for me. Like there's this thing that we're going through, and I've already planned to preach on it. The Spirit's at work there, but even then, I have to figure out, how do I handle this topic in a way that works with what we're dealing with, what the people in my congregation. So it's a very human enterprise. So how do we balance there's benefits that we're going to talk about how AI can help ministers without allowing that to spill over and take away the parts that have to remain human in ministry?
Yeah, I want to answer that in two ways. The first thing I want to point out is, so broadly speaking, how a lot of AI based technologies work is that it's kind of a chat. There's a prompt. You type in a prompt and it spits something out. There are other applications for AI. There are other ways to do it. But right now, a lot of what we see, the more popular level that most people are going to interact with, are kind of a chat like thing. So, first and foremost, we have to remember the human role in the prompt creator. Uh, I don't necessarily think AI should be spitting out your sermon series or whatnot. It could tell you a relevant scripture for a series on joy, but ultimately we're responsible as church leaders, as just human beings, in kind of that role as uh, getting the ball rolling. We're the ultimate generators. We generate the original idea and then we let it continue. I have a little bit used AI in some of my fiction, creating things, because I enjoy writing the stories. I don't really want it to take over that role. But there are times when it's like, hey, I kind of have this idea, but like, I need a conflict here, or where should we set this, or something like that. But ultimately, I'm up here, I have the vision, and then I kind of let AI sort of fill in the little gap, or almost kind of work as my brainstorming partner, just like I would if, like, my brother and I, he's also a creative, we talk, hey, this is kind of what I want to do in my story, what do you think here? That same kind of thing. So first we have kind of the human in that element. But then we go back to my pal Marshall McLuhan, because as technology extends us and atrophies something, we have to be really aware of making sure it doesn't completely atrophy these very spiritually important parts of our existence, of our humanity, like that human relationship. We've seen this with social media. Just the truth is, there's a lot of people that just cannot carry a conversation on in person. Um, and I've had this issue with myself and an experience with other people. Just change the dynamic when I can't react with a GIF to somebody in real life, or something like that. I can't think about how to respond because I have to respond right there, or whatever it is. Like, we have to be aware of that. Ultimately, AI, any technology, should extend the human parts of it. I advocate in the book for writing a mission statement, for creating a policy that really prioritizes that human part. Because if we don't do it on purpose, it won't happen. That's kind of how I approach the human.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it comes down to that intention, right? It absolutely will get rid of the human if we're not careful. But hopefully we're careful.
And so that when we think about humans, and what it means to be human and how that works specifically in a church context, it led me to then think about the implications of AI and work, because it has the very good potential, as many things in history have. I mean, the printing press, of changing the way human beings work and operate. And I know some people fear, well, what if AI eventually replaces like all work? Like, we already know that machines have replaced some work, and that has to be changed. And we know that, there are even laws, and there will probably have to be some as we move forward, about what you can't outsource to a machine, right? Because to create jobs, to keep economies going, right? But I know some people fear of, well, what if AI ends up being able to do most everything that human beings can do? Let's say it could do 90% of what human beings can do. Is there 10% left that can employ everybody in the world? Like, where where are we left? And that's a that gets into some economic questions and stuff like
Right.
that. I'm not sure I want to
Policy,
get into,
exactly.
but I want to think about the importance of work. Like, I don't think AI should ever completely replace work. I think work's connected to what it means to be human. I think God has things to say about work. And so that's another thing that I wanted to ask you to kind of elaborate on is what are some of the implications of AI and human work? And then what should we as Christians believe and think about in terms of the human connection to the work and how God has created us?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you asked that because I spent a little bit of time in the book, but in all the interactions I've had with people about AI, the the biggest thing seems to be what does this mean for work and jobs and the economy? Really interesting because for me it's like, wait, there are bigger concerns about lack of critical thinking and lack of human connection. That's what I'm more concerned about. But a lot of people think, what does that mean for my paycheck? And I think it's still a valid question. It really is. And I think you're right that, in my opinion, work is a part of our sacred task of being humans, but it's also not the only thing that makes us human and defines us. And I worry sometimes in our society that we make work too much of a focus on everything. Um, yeah, I just this is a little example. But I just saw this meme recently about like why is it that if I'm the most efficient worker, I get punished by getting more work or something like that. Getting a promotion or here's another project because you finished that one so fast. And that is how our society works. Um, if you're efficient, if you're good at your job, if you have more time, we tend to do more work. And as AI saves us time, I think we're probably going to find a way to spend it that maybe is doing more work. But I actually think we should also recognize that this is an opportunity for more intentional leisure that where we could practice Sabbath for once and spend more time with our families. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but sometimes I'm like, really, the whole 8 to 5 workday is preventing people from being with their families and from making these human connections, and that's what I think it's all about. So, if AI saves you a couple hours, hopefully you can get a couple hours off early. But we get into economic and policy and political questions, and I wish I had a solution for everything. I wish, but I know as a church, we should at least be advocating for. We should always have been advocating for a healthy balance of work and relationships because work is important. I think we're gonna still be doing it some way, shape, or form. Gonna change, but I don't want us to focus so much on work and think it's bad to relax or to take a day off or something like that.
Yep.
Because on Wall Street, it seems like it's villainized and stuff to take a day off or you're expected to work 80 hours a week or something. That is not a reflection, I think, of what God wants.
No.
When God says, have dominion over the earth, work, that's totally a calling. But hey, humans, we like to take things up to the extreme and find our identity in work where that's not where our identity is. It's a piece of who we are, sure, absolutely. Hey, I'm a huge fan of finding meaning in your work, if you can do that. But at the end of the day, your self-worth is not tied with how many hours you put in on the time clock.
I really appreciate that balance that you give because I don't know, I found in the church, sometimes we get it all wrong. Like we think work's so important, but it's not for the right reasons. Like God created us as working beings, but that's not why we think work's important. It tends to be more because we're greedy sometimes. And or because it's necessary to make ends meet, which is the problem of how we take care of the poor, or we think that work is only a paycheck, right? It's just a waste of my time. Again, because I'm only doing it because society makes me do it in order to live. And I've pointed out before, talk to anyone who's retired. Most people don't like just sitting around. Like, I don't think God made us to just sit. And so I really appreciated the idea of, when you have that extra time, if you do, if AI gives it to you, you're retired, whatever, being intentional, right, about how I use that time.
Well, if we go back to ministry, I mean, Spencer, I'm sure you've heard like people say, "Oh, you only work on Sundays," or "You don't have a real job," or something like that. Yeah. It's because we think real jobs are working so much or something, but so much of ministry, and this makes it complicated, is not quantifiable, right? Like, we can't just point directly to, I mean, yeah, you have sermon prep and you have prep for this and that, sure, but a lot of ministry revolves relationships, and I grabbed coffee with this guy, and things like that, that ultimately serve humanity, and it's not always kind of just seen as work or something. So
yeah,
we have to think of work in maybe a little different way than sort of our capitalistic culture has taught us to. So work's important, but it's just not everything. And any chance we can get, man, to prioritize the human relationships. I know in my ministry experience, I love teaching and preaching, but man, there's something really awesome about going and getting a sandwich with somebody, or getting a coffee with somebody. Like that is like where I really feel like the ministry happens. Especially if they like my sermon or my class and talk about it, then it's like full circle. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that.
Well, you mentioned preaching, which is the next thing that I wanted to think about, is some of the ethical concerns for preaching, because I know that as a preacher, and you as someone who has and does preach in various capacities at various times, right? That preaching is something, I think it's important for the church. It's something that's at my heart, and I think AI can be helpful for preachers, but there are some ethical considerations. There's plagiarism, originality, the human and pastoral component. We just talked about, like, knowing your audience and spending time with them is so important in being able to craft a sermon. So I wanted to have you speak just a moment on some of those ethical concerns for preaching.
Yeah, plagiarism is a big one, and so I defend AI as not. I don't think artificial intelligence is plagiarism. Some people talk about that as plagiarism. We're getting dicey, and I mean it's a dicey subject, and I know there's a lot of big celebrities that are suing these AI companies because they read my book or something like that, or they sampled my music, and I have those concerns too.
So. On that point, because that's interesting, to think about, is that the way, I think it's more the way that AI borrows things from people, right? And, especially when you're putting things out there for, like, purchase. Again, it's not all about money, but at the same time, there's some ethical considerations of being compensated for your contributions.
Sure.
Which is probably a conversation for a different time. But what I wanted to hit on what you just said is when it comes to preaching and stuff like that, and because AI is drawing from different things. To me, I've always seen it as, like, I've read a lot of books and heard a lot of people talk. So a lot of what comes out of my mouth is not 100% original. I don't know where it comes from, though, and it probably doesn't come from one person. It's a synthesis of everything that I've done. My grandfather used to say when he was asked, how long did that sermon take you to write? He would always say, my entire life. Because everything he's experienced, he's heard all of the relationships that he's had with this church, all of that up to the day he preaches a sermon plays a part in how that sermon is preached. And
Absolutely.
I always loved when he said would say that, because that taught me so much. And it's like, yeah, you know, if you're quoting someone or an idea is coming from someone in particular, yes, you need to give credit. But there's the other side that we know that, yeah, I've learned all these things from other people, and I can't always keep up of where I get everything from, and nor should we have to. And I've always kind of seen AI is kind of doing some of that. And I think I just wanted to highlight that distinction that you made.
You're totally right.
There is some concerns for people that are producing, but when we're thinking about us as preachers, I'm kind of with you. Like, I wouldn't classify what AI is doing in plagiarism in that way, though there's some things that people will have to sort out as time moves on, probably.
Yeah, and you know, some people are like, I'm not going to touch the technology until it's gone through the Supreme Court or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I don't. There's a case to be made, I guess, for not being an early adopter for some things, you know. But just with the rate of things that are going, like I even rushed the publication of this book because I'm like, this is happening so fast. It might be out of date in a year or two, and 1,000 other people are going to come out with another book that's going to be the same topic. Like, it's just anyway. So yeah, talking about preaching and plagiarism and all that kind of stuff, I do want to note, first of all, if you stood up in front of your congregation and said, oh, this sermon was AI generated, just in general, I don't think people are going to feel good about that. There's also been, Barna Group did some studies that people are going to be uncomfortable with that. And I hope, though, again, it comes back to, I want humans to be in the driver's seat when it comes to AI. Instead of having it generate a whole thing for you, use that life experience that makes you valuable as a minister and have it be your research assistant, have it help along the way. Because I mentioned this in the book, I just think that what makes a sermon come to life is the human behind it. Ultimately, I want your stories, but more than that, I want to know that you are who you say you are on a Tuesday night or something like that. And like I want to know that you practice what you preach and there's this human behind it. So I love to use AI for things like sermon illustrations and things like that, or pulling out quotes. One of my favorite ways to use AI is it's different than Google. Google, you still need to be a little bit specific or ask it a question or something. But AI, I'll be like, you know the like one quote from Lord of the Rings that something about like, you know, there's evil in this time, and I don't remember what the rest of it was. It'll tell me because it's built that like kind of natural human language thing, and so I can have it tell me that. I've also used it to outline biblical text, give me just kind of a brief breakdown and things like that. There's all sorts of ways to use it while still having the human as the driver. So I do think that's important for preaching, that the human factor is important. In the book, I quote some Thomas Oden, his book
Read
Pastoral. Yeah, I think we were both in that same class. Yeah, exactly. I read that in grad school. I quote a little bit of Scott McKnight's book, Pastor Paul. It's just to kind of talk about this idea of the pastor, of the preacher, of the minister. It's so much more than the words of the sermon, and that's the thing that AI can never replace. It's the life lived. It's the story that you're telling. Yeah. And so I love that quote from your grandfather. That makes sense.
You know, while we were talking earlier, it hit my mind. You know, you talk about. I'm pretty sure you talk about in the book. You know, the the human behind it. So you don't want, AI preaching the sermon, but
Mm-hmm.
while we were talking about small churches, it got me thinking. I was like, okay, so you're a small church, you have a preacher. You want to give the preacher time off so he doesn't get burnt out, right? My experience is I get a fair amount of time off, and I need every single week. Like it's ministry's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Our struggle though is a lot of the times, finding someone to preach when I'm not here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there will ever be a good way to do this, but it makes me wonder. I'm like, well, what if I wrote a manuscript? Like I wrote something, but I just didn't have to present it. Like I could put something together, but still have my time off, and maybe one day AI will be able to help with that, because I know in small churches again that's a big struggle of it's
Sure.
I joke sometimes that they fall apart when the preacher leaves town. And sometimes that's the case because the preacher's having to do so much, and
Yeah.
there's not always another solution. Like it's not always as simple as, well, other people need to do more. Sometimes, you're not going to get 100% of people doing everything. But of those that are going to commit to doing things, sometimes everyone's just kind of tapped out. Like I know the church that I'm at now was searching for a preacher for like 2 years. Like everyone was
So
burnt
common.
out when I got here because they had been doing it
Yeah.
as well as their full-time jobs and their families. And like they had been doing everything. And so like, I get it. And there's not an easy solution to that, but I just wonder, maybe one of these days it can help with, you wouldn't want to do it every week, but I wonder, what if twice a year because I know some churches will show a video of another preacher sometimes because of that problem.
Sure.
I almost feel like if the preacher who knows them wrote it and it's just being presented, might
Arguably,
be better. I don't know.
arguably, you have that example with some of the epistles. I mean, if you think about it, Paul writes a letter to the Romans. He sends it with Phoebe. She's doing some kind of presenting on it. Maybe expounding on it. Maybe just reading. Whatever she's doing here, it's like, okay, we kind of have this example. That's how letters worked back then. Somebody had to read it to the congregation, but it's Paul's words. So I don't know. That's an interesting area that I hadn't thought about. But I mean, you're right about small churches and being tapped out.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. With that being said, let's. We've been talking for a while, but it's fine. This is good. This is interesting. Right. So let's move on to some of the ministry usage, some of the practical stuff that we've hinted at up to this point. So you, in your book, you list 3 different areas that AI can assist churches. You talk about teaching ministry and some different things under teaching, care and community, as well as administration. So you want to dive deep into those 3 areas, go buy the book. But I want to ask you, what do you think is the biggest benefit that AI can give the church? If you kind of had to narrow all of this stuff down, what would you say is the biggest benefit?
Honestly, it's kind of a tie for me between what I would call extending our created resources, tied with, and I'll explain that in a second, tied with helping us with the less fun grunt work. But on the first point, well, there's plenty. Yeah. The first point there is like, I'm not saying the AI needs to write your sermons and do all your classes for you, but what is so brilliant, and there are many organizations that have already popped up to do this specifically for sermons and things, is extending that with discussion questions, with Bible studies, with reading plans. Um, when I grew up, for a while, the church I grew up at, for a while, I was in a small group where we did a sermon discussion, Sunday night sermon discussion. Not really my favorite kind of small group, but it's a thing. And it would have been so nice to have an audio or something or transcript of the sermon. AI spits out, here are some good discussion questions. And you could specify the different points you want to dive in on or whatever. So AI can extend what you already created really easily. I know you've used it for that kind of purpose as well. It's beautiful. And then that's tied um, with kind of that doing more of that administrative, not so great work that's just kind of organizing your calendar or writing a checklist for the event so you don't forget. There are so many ways there that it can help you out. And so I guess for me, I've been a lot into the teaching ministry kind of area and stuff. So I have experimented more with that. The administrative side, because I've never been a solo minister at a place or anything like that, I haven't had to do a lot of that stuff. But I just imagine, and I just know from talking to so many people that would be a huge blessing, a burden lifted off people. So that's kind of how I would make this tied. Personally.
Yeah, I want to mention that in the book, you give a lot of examples of places, websites that you can go to do these things, which is something else that I really appreciated about the book. So we're talking about several different ways that AI can be used. And one of the reasons that I'd recommend the book is in the chapters, but there's also at the back of the book lists of different places to go to do these things. So you're not just kind of left with, hey, AI can help with fill in the blank, but you want that, here's where to go do it. Because I know when I was reading the book, there were some things that you mentioned in it that I didn't know were out there, and I went and toyed around with them because I was like, hey, that would be helpful. And so here on our outline that Jake and I have that kind of bringing us through this, I listed some of the things that AI has helped me. So, in small town ministry by myself, doing youth ministry and preaching and technology and you name it, I'm probably involved in it in some way. AI has helped me in several ways, and a lot of these were things that I've recently started doing since reading your book. Like I want to mention that.
Good.
So ministers out there, read the book, because I like some of it were things like, yeah, I knew AI could do that, but so why am I not using it for that?
Fair enough.
And it was like it was kind of like a push forward of, hey, go do this. And then there were things in there that I had never thought about using AI for. So some things that I've used it for is we recently redesigned the church logo, and AI designed it for me, and I made some tweaks to it. And one of the things that I did, for example, I'm a big proponent of, I think a logo needs to mean something to the congregation. Like I don't just generic that looks like everybody else. When your congregation sees it, it should mean something to them. So for example, there's this little like logo to the side of a church, what's supposed to look like a church. It's got like a cross in the middle, and the cross was something that I added because I was like, I want the cross Jesus. He's at the center of our existence at the church. So there's some meaning there, but then there's 3 colors in it that correspond to the colors in the artwork that I put together for our vision statement, which is to love God, serve people, bless the world. So when our congregation looks at that, it has some meaning for who we are. And that's something that I was able to put in. So that goes back to a lot of what you've mentioned about the human part, like that balance there. It was, hey, AI, give me this, but then I'm going to make it now with something as simple as changing the colors.
Right.
means something for us, so that I wanted my congregation, when you look at this out there, from our website to the back of the T-shirts that they throw out at the football games, like when you see this out in the community, it means something. And my hope is even that will spur people on to conversation. Like someone says, "Oh, I saw your logo on the back of the T-shirt." Well, here's something you probably didn't know about the logo, right? That cross means something. Those colors
let's
mean
get real
something.
practical, because I've been a part of a church that did a whole logo redesign and all that jazz, and we're talking four figures for some of that work, hiring out somebody else, another company to do it. So, and at a small church that don't have that kind of money, I mean, I'm all for let's saving us some time and effort, just like what you're doing with your logo.
With AI, I did it in a day.
Yeah.
Like we tweaked with it over the course of some time, but the base was done, and then we tweaked with colors and presentation and all that kind of stuff. I use it for the artwork for my sermon series. I find that important, some kind of visual that goes with the series. And there's a lot of good websites, Igniter Media and places like that have PowerPoint templates that you pay for a subscription. And I use those a lot. And a lot of the times what comes with those subscriptions is editing. Like they'll change the title and all that kind of stuff for you. And to me, that's always been the easiest. Like that's where I go at first. Like, do they have some stock, something that fits what, there's plenty of series that there's nothing out there that fits. Like I need something on my own. And every year we do a theme for the year. And that theme is normally the thing that I need designed on its own. Like an individual sermon series, I can normally find something. But this big theme that's going to tie the whole year together, I need something for that. And I've used AI for that. For our theme for this year, which is cultivating culture, I had AI generate, I think it was 4. And we sent those out to the congregation and let the congregation vote. Which one do you like the best? And that's the one that we used for our theme for the year. And again, you think about the time it would have taken me to just make one. Within an hour, I had 4 good ones that I could send out to and let the congregation take part in the theme for the year, and not just feel like, the leadership, we choose the theme, but now they get an ownership in it because they are taking part in the artwork, which I think is a very helpful thing. I've used it for sermon illustrations. You've mentioned that. I used it this past Sunday. I used the example of an asymptote in math. And I was thinking, how do I define this? Where a congregation will understand what I'm trying to get across. Google was of no help. Everything was too mathematical. So I went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, I need a definition for asymptote for this context. And what it spit out was tremendous. Like it was just perfect for what I was needing. That's been helpful. Sermon series titles. I did one on the Holy Spirit and I'm like, I do not know what to call this. I think I did it with cultivating culture as well. But I couldn't decide on what to, so I went to ChatGPT. I was like, hey, give me some sermon series, Holy Spirit. I think one was Unleashing the Spirit, and I ended up going with Unleashed. I kind of shortened it, but I would have never thought of Unleashed or Unleashing, without, kind of like you said, I would have had to call up all my buddies and we'd be thinking about it for a month and maybe somebody would come up with something. And it took me a minute to settle on a title because it took like less than a second for it to spit out 10 options for me. And I was like, something stuck out. For our teens, they love Kahoot. They use it in school, which is just a question.
I use that with my students when I was teaching.
They love that for like review. So like we just finished the book of Galatians and then they were so excited to do a Kahoot over Galatians review. And so I put in some questions of some specific things that we talked about that I think are important, but that was like 5 questions and I wanted like 15, 20 questions. And so I went to AI. I said, hey, give me some questions for a review for a youth group at church over the book of Galatians. And I had it generate several times and I was able to put together my questions. Discussion questions, like when I was teaching through Galatians, a section like the fruit of the Spirit. I'd say, hey, I'd give those verses, Galatians 5, whatever, like 19 through 21, I think is the fruit of the Spirit. Hey, give me some discussion questions for teenagers about Galatians 5, 19 through 21. And a lot of the times I just pick one because we'll kind of, sit on something. And sometimes it's like, I don't know exactly where to go with this. I found that helpful. I do the same thing for our small groups. So sometimes we discuss sermon things. It's generally not the sermon. It's sermon a series adjacent. So here's something we didn't get into, but we're going to go there. Sometimes it is the sermon because the sermon it is so important for something that maybe we're dealing with or something like that. Like we need to talk more about reconciliation. Like maybe we got problem. Like we're not gonna go with Jake. Like we're gonna continue that very thought. Sometimes I just did this one for this past Sunday. We give out a Bible reading schedule to the church that's based on the Revised Common Lectionary. And so we encourage our members to read the lectionary passages every single week. The lectionary scriptures for the week, I choose one that I use at the beginning of worship. So we begin worship, I give a little thought, and I read that text to set our minds for worship. That's based on the lectionary. So we're beginning worship with one of the passages that they're going to be reading this week. I'll mention some of the themes. And a lot of the times we'll discuss those in our small groups. So I chose 2 of the lectionary passages. It was something with Noah right after the flood, I think. It was the promise and the rainbow and all that. And Jesus' baptism in Mark, I think were the ones for this past Sunday. I took those 2 and put them into ChatGPT and said, hey, give me some questions on these 2 passages and then on these passages as they relate to one another. And it gave me 5 on Genesis, it gave me 5 on Mark, and then it gave me 5 on combining the 2 together. And that was the Bible study for our small groups this week. And it took me a lot less time than it. The discussion questions for me are always the hardest, like choosing the passages or the theme. I write a little explanation about what's going on so that whoever's teaching it has a little something to get going. That's always, that's where I excel, talking and writing about scripture. It's the discussion portion that I struggle the most with. I love discussion, but facilitating that is not what I'm the best at. And AI helps me come up with questions that really help facilitate discussion. So there's some areas that I've used it, and all of those overlap with things that he talks in the book. I just thought that might be helpful for some of the people listening. With that being said, a couple more things that I want to hit on real quick and let Jake comment on. You spend a section of the book talking about getting congregations on board with using artificial intelligence, right? Probably not the best idea just to jump off the deep end one day, especially depending on how deep it's going to go in, right? Me using it in the privacy of my office, just me, is very different than doing things on a very bigger scale. So how can a ministry team, church leaders, how can they get a congregation on board for using AI? And then should every congregation be using AI in some form or fashion?
Well, I think it comes down to one, transparency is very important. Like you said, for those bigger things. The discussion questions, I don't think anybody's going to throw a fit about. Um, but anything used on a larger scale, I think transparency is important um, because people have strong feelings about artificial intelligence. Whether that's right or wrong, people just do. And what you don't want to do is like trick people. And I've been in some different congregational settings where we have considered some different transitions and change, and took a class on that in grad school about managing transitions and conflicts and things. And transparency is one of those things that comes up. Like, we have to talk about it. What you don't do is just say, "Hey, I'm going to step up front and we're changing worship now, and we're doing it this way, and that freaks people out, especially for whatever reason, churchgoers. You can't spring something on them like that.
We don't like change.
No, we really don't. Really don't. Especially as people of the book or whatever, and we like it. We like it old fashioned because sometimes we think that means it's better. Um, but when it comes to AI, we do want to be careful. So transparent is one of those first things. But I also think modeling and showing examples is another really powerful tool that we have. Um, where if a church is considering um, in some other kind of change with theology or certain practice, many times they'll have committees or an open forum or things like that. Now that we can get too many committees, of course, and things like that.
Yeah.
That's also a problem. But it's like, okay, here's some chance to discuss, and let's model in real time. I love your idea of sending out the different logo examples or something like that. Something really like low stakes to introduce those kind of concepts, and let's take people along on a journey and things like that. It's just the truth. That's how we change people's minds. We don't do brute force attack. We say, here's kind of what I'm doing and thinking. Come join me. Let's have that conversation together. And then your last question, real fun one about, do churches have to or something like that?
Should every church be using AI?
I think unless you have a church of everybody over 80, you should definitely be talking about it. Using it, I think, is ultimately a preference. I think it's one of those things like that we should probably start talking about, and at least in the next couple of years, like we got to talk about it. We already mentioned like it's not going to like disappear because we didn't talk about it. I think ultimately it's something that comes down to personal preference. You manuscript your sermons. I'm more of a bullet point guy, and it's preference, right? There's not like a God-ordained way to write a sermon. And I think, I do say that, I know there are church contexts where ministers are just overwhelmed. And if they have these tools and they're saying like, I refuse to use these tools, but it's a case where it could really save them in the sense of like help them have time for self-care, or if they're neglecting their families, or if they're neglecting the poor and needy in their community and context, like, okay, well maybe this really is something that you really really need to consider, and it could be, well, I'll use this joke as an example because I think this is relevant in a lot of cases. There's an old joke about somebody during a flood, and they're standing on their roof, the water's up really high, and they pray for God to save them, and somebody comes by in a boat that says, hop in, and the person says, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And somebody comes in a helicopter, hey, hop in, I'm going to save you, and like, no, I'm waiting for God to save. Sometimes I wonder if we're too much like the person on the roof. Like, God can work through these technology, these tools. I mean, God works through imperfect people and foreign nations, and I mean, come on, just crack open Scripture. God works in weird, crazy ways. God can definitely work through these technological tools, and I just don't want churches to be in a position where we cast off something that really could be God's way of
Yeah.
saving us. Not in the sense of like, eternal destiny salvation, but in helping us do ministry, in helping us engage our
Mhm.
communities in just more powerful, better ways. So I just think that's how God works
It'll
sometimes.
it's definitely beneficial, whether you choose to use it or not, as
100%.
you've
Yeah.
you've mentioned and definitely point out in your book. So if we think about them AI being very beneficial to most, not all churches, benefit whether you choose to use it or not. How do you think AI can be used in a cost-effective manner? I know that when you mention adding things, a lot of church leaders' first question will be, well, how much does it cost? Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of churches, again, we're thinking about the benefits, especially for small churches who are going to have packed budgets. Most churches have packed budgets. There's
Oh yeah.
not, regardless of size, there's
Oh
not
yeah.
much extra money to go around. Sometimes there's no money to go around. So the question is, hey, if we're going to spend some money on things related to AI, it's going to have to come from somewhere. And so part of the decision in using some things may be, well, hey, is the cost going to bring us enough of a benefit to be worth it? So I wanted to allow you to address a little bit about some cost effective strategies for the use of AI.
That's a valid question, definitely. And every church has to sit with those questions and discuss what's right for their context, of course. Um, in some cases, it might be ministers, paying their own way, and because a lot of these tools can have a life outside of ministry, of course,
Yep.
like ChatGPT or something. Um, and so it kind of depends on a lot of that, right? That's the classic theology answer. It depends. Um, but more specifically, luckily we're in a place right now, at least, where I feel like a lot of the tools are not cost prohibitive. Um,
Yeah.
the thing is, I don't want to jinx it or even date this podcast because I don't know what the future looks like. Currently, ChatGPT's paid plan is $20 a month, which can probably be fit into a budget, um, depending on the congregation and things like that. So, luckily, a lot of these are pretty cheap. Although I have seen some concerning things about how ChatGPT, for instance, is actually losing a lot of money um, because of how much the servers cost and blah, blah, blah. So that might change in the future. I don't know. Um, so, I mean, I guess it really just kind of comes down to wisdom. Um, a lot of these have free tools that you can use to a certain extent and things like that. When it comes to a little bit of a mid-sized to larger congregation, it might make, actually even smaller congregations, but it might make sense to think about, there are now, I've been seeing certain plans that can have multiple users on them, um, which I'm really excited about. Um, I know I have a friend who co-founded BibleToolbox.ai, and they offer a lifetime subscription for churches that has like 4 users underneath it. And I think the price could change. I don't want to date it exactly, but I believe that is about $400 for a lifetime subscription, and it has like 4 users underneath it. So for some churches, that might be really cost effective. If you have a staff of 4, and we're talking lifetime subscription, it's a one-time kind of thing.
Yeah.
However, I would probably say most of these we're looking at monthly subscriptions. We live in a subscription obsessed culture right now. So it is something to have to budget. Hopefully, though, I mean, the real hope is that we don't just save time, but these tools also save you money, where you don't have to. Uh, spend money on certain contractors or outside kind of people, um, where you can save your bacon from making mistakes in financial areas or anything or whatever that could come back to bite you, in the end. Um, so really, I think we need to be thinking of these tools as also money savers as well as time savers, because there are so many ways where they can potentially replace other tools, potentially maybe even replace curriculum costs or something like that. Um, in certain cases, I mean, somebody's going to have to spend the time to start generating curriculum, but
Yeah.
for a small church, $20 a month to help create some kids' curriculum might be worth whatever you pay for the 4 times a year giant boxes of curriculum that you use for
Good point.
every couple grade levels or something like that. So it's just kind of what you want to do, and I think it also depends on the kinds of people you have at your church. If you have a bunch of tech illiterate people, it probably doesn't make sense to purchase AI if you don't have somebody willing to use it, right, or
Hmm.
play around with it. So that would be another consideration.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, and like you said, luckily not to date it, things aren't ridiculously expensive. There are a ton of free things out there at
There
the
are.
moment.
Oh yeah.
I've spent very little on, like, I don't have a subscription anywhere.
Okay.
A lot of the times with like some of the design stuff, sometimes at the end, to get the one without the watermarks, and
Right.
you purchase it, but you get to go through the process first at a lot of places, which is also nice because it's like I don't like
Hmm.
what it's given me. I don't have to. I'm not already invested.
Hmm.
Um, so that's important to remember. For this section, and then we'll close up. The final question that I have here is, talk a little bit about, you talk about this in your book, the role of higher church leadership, and by that I mean um, a lot of churches, especially in our tradition, churches of Christ,
Hmm.
you have an eldership that has a responsibility of shepherding and overseeing the spiritual life of the congregation. A lot of churches will have some kind of lead minister, someone who
Hmm.
helps kind of oversee the office, oversee the rest of the staff. So, in those kinds of contexts, when you start to integrate that among staff, among volunteers, what is the responsibility of those? I hate to use the word higher because I don't like hierarchy
Hmm.
in the church, but you do have certain roles that have a higher responsibility for the way that AI is used in a congregation. And so, what is the responsibility of those ministers or elders who fill those roles when a church may begin to implement AI into the congregational life?
Well, I compared AI to different technological revolutions like radio, TV, things like that. The truth is, like, we are dealing with something that is a little different and has such a great potential for good, but also a lot of potential for bad or for misinformation at the least. I mean, I could ask it to give me a background on the Book of John, and it could give me some incorrect things. One of those because people debate the background of the Book of John um, a lot. So I guess that's another reason for you still got to do your homework, kids. Um, but I digress. So I think when we're dealing with something like AI, somebody does have to lead the process or think about it, um, be a final say on certain things. And that doesn't have to be an expert in AI, luckily, but somebody who is in tune with the congregation's mission, their will, and can make some of those decisions. I do think it's important to have some kind of point person on that, and somebody who kind of knows their way around it at least a little bit to make some of those decisions. And I say in the book that I really think we need to write policies and we need to write mission statements if we're really going to employ this on a wide scale. Um, I'm a huge fan of mission statements. I've been through churches that have really thought seriously about their mission statements and how they want to present themselves. I think that's great because a mission statement helps us make choices when the chips are down. Should
Yeah.
we do this or this? Which one fits with our mission? I think we got to do something with AI, and we have to have somebody that kind of leads that process here and can decide that. Uh, if we're in a case where should we use AI for this? If Susie Q over here has the gift of administration, but wants to be paid for her service, but we could have AI do some of the similar things. What does our mission statement say about a dicey issue like that? What are the considerations there? Do we have the budget
Yeah.
for it? Is our value, if humans can do it, we want humans to do it? Well, whatever you decide is right, somebody's got to make those decisions and or help facilitate congregational discussions at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah. Side note, the Bible's not your mission statement. In case anybody listening was wondering, I
No
think
creed,
Scripture
but
should
yeah.
inform your mission statement, but the fact we have Scripture is not a reason not to do a mission or vision statement because
Absolutely.
you know, y'all go listen to my most recent sermons series, or if I decide to publish it as a book. Paul cultivated different types of cultures in the different churches that he was at, and I think there's aspects of all that we need to, but it's going to look different. All right, we've talked probably way too long, but I've really enjoyed this, and we talked about it at the beginning. I think it's important. I think it's necessary. This is what's going on in the world, and it's a benefit to churches and to ministers. And so, my final question, as we get ready to close, we've talked about some different resources for AI throughout this podcast, but I want you to give me your top 3 AI resources for churches. So a minister's listening to this, they say, I want to start using AI. Where would they be? Where are the first 3 places they should go to begin that journey?
Well, ChatGPT is the crowning, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? It's kind of the big thing. One reason it's so versatile, especially if you do the paid version like I have, it also creates images. You can create custom chats that are trained on your specific resources. It's just so versatile. I use it almost like a search engine sometimes to ask questions. Other times it can generate me text or questions. It just does all sorts of things like that. Um, the second one I would recommend, I do like Pulpit AI as an organization, not just a tool. Um, I've gotten to interact a little bit with the founders of Pulpit AI, and their vision for the church and technology is I think, so rooted in wisdom and scripture, where they look forward, but also understand kind of the different critical elements that come into play there. So I like that. Pulpit AI is good for it is where you upload your sermon audio, and then it just produces all kinds of content right off of that. So that's real nice. Just with an audio or a video from your sermon, suddenly you have all this stuff. And I believe they're still in beta, so more things are probably to come for that. The third one, I've been playing around recently with BibleToolbox.ai that I mentioned. My friend Keith Farron co-founded. He is an author and speaker. And that one is interesting and cool because it's very specific for Bible study. It's also really nice for people that have less experience with AI stuff because you open up ChatGPT, you have to tell it what to do. And as you learn over time, you have to be very specific. I want this, I don't want this. Do it in this many words, not like, do it with this context and things. But BibleToolbox.ai is designed to is designed where there's drop-down menus, and it's designed in such a way where you can kind of choose, this is exactly what I'm looking for. It also has a feature where you can actually edit the outputs, which is nice that a lot of these AI things haven't used. You have to copy it into something else and edit it there or something like that. So I like that one. In full transparency, I do give people a special deal. At the back of the book, I will have the secret code that will get you 20% off of BibleToolbox.ai. But you can check that out by going to that website address, BibleToolbox.ai, or BibleToolbox.ai/Jake if you want to monetarily support what I do, and if you're thinking about purchasing that. So all of those, advertisements aside, are all, I think, good places to start. It kind of just depends on your level. Like ChatGPT is versatile, but it takes some getting used to, whereas like BibleToolbox.ai is very specific for Bible study, for devotional, for curriculum, for sermons, but it's really user-friendly. So it kind of depends what you want to do.
All right. Well, Jake, I want to thank you for being on the podcast with us. I know this was a long time coming. We had talked about doing this before and never got around to starting the interview portion of the podcast, but I think this was a great way to kick it off. I thank you for being with us and sharing some great tools and information on artificial intelligence. With that being said, those of you listening, make sure to go and find his book, AI in Church Ministry, Applications of Artificial Intelligence for Faith Communities by Jake Doberenz, for a more in-depth discussion, some other resources that you can use for AI, and some more ethical and theological considerations that he has in that book. But that is the conclusion now of our first of hopefully many interviews to come. Thank you for listening and watching this. Go check out our other resources on thinkingtheologically.com, on, again, any of our social media, and now on YouTube. Thank you for listening.